The House on Haunted Hill. The house on Haunted Hill, a gaunt silhouette against the heavens, resembled less a home and more a spectral monument to loss. Locals whispered its history, weaving a tapestry of dread and conjecture. Storms, they claimed, carried Amelia's name on the wind, and her wraith haunted the upper stories, an eternal sentinel. A decade had ebbed since Amelia Penhaligon vanished, yet the local lore had not softened with time. It had calcified, as unyielding as the bedrock on which the house stood vigil. Arthur Penhaligon was more than familiar with these morbid fables. He lived them. His days were a carefully choreographed defense against the encroaching madness born of grief and suspicion. He'd rise well before first light, the damp chill of the ancient stone a constant reminder of his solitary state. Bitter, black coffee was his only solace as he sat, gazing at the untamed garden where roses Amelia once coaxed into riotous bloom now languished, choked by weeds. He lacked the heart, the will, to restore them. Mornings were spent cloistered in his study, walled in by books. Mostly law books, artifacts of a career long since shelved. They were now a bulwark, offering flimsy protection against the relentless hum of village gossip. He attempted to read, to lose himself within complex legal arguments, but focus remained elusive, his thoughts constantly drawn back to that night, to the gaping void beside him in their bed. Lunch was a hurried, lonely affair, a sandwich consumed standing at the kitchen counter. He couldn't bring himself to face the dining room. Too many vibrant echoes lingered, phantom laughter and shared meals that now felt like barbs of exquisite cruelty. Afternoons found him patrolling the grounds. Ostensibly, he was inspecting fences and outbuildings, but the truth was he searched. He hunted for something, anything, to quiet the inner cacophony. A sign, an answer, a way to absolve himself in the eyes of the world, and perhaps more importantly, in his own. He was aware of the town's judgment, felt the sting of their pity, the barely veiled accusation in their stares. They believed he'd succeeded in the perfect crime, burying his wife somewhere on that bleak hillside and living out a grim parody of freedom. He had tried, endlessly, to explain to the authorities, to acquaintances, to anyone who offered an ear. But his words seemed impotent, lost in a tangle of sorrow and bewilderment. He hadn't murdered Amelia. He adored her. The thought of hurting her was abhorrent. Yet the absolute absence of evidence, the baffling nature of her disappearance, had cornered him, leaving him no escape. Evenings were the worst trial. Darkness amplified the house's sighs and moans, transforming them into spectral footfalls and hushed, accusatory voices. He'd bolt every door, secure every curtain, and retreat to his study, finding scant comfort in a glass of whiskey. He'd attempt to watch television, but the fleeting images only serve as a stark reminder of his profound loss. At times, he'd fixate on the fireplace, the cold, gray, ash of visual metaphor for warmth extinguished. He recalled nights spent with Amelia, entwined before a roaring fire, sharing secrets and aspirations. Those reminiscences were now both balm and acid. Sleep was a rare visitor. He'd thrash for hours, besieged by visions. Amelia materialized in every corner of his mind's eye, her face a mask of sorrowful reproach, her eyes brimming with accusation. He'd bolt upright, drenched in cold perspiration, the silence of the house weighing upon him like a leaden shroud. 10 years, a decade of this unyielding torment. A decade lived beneath the pall of suspicion. A decade spent clinging to the futile hope that Amelia might, against all odds, return. He recalled the initial frenzy, the invasive intrusion that had engulfed the house in the days after Amelia's vanishing. Law enforcement had meticulously combed through the property, searching for any hint of foul play. They'd turned over the garden soil, pumped dry the well, even deployed cadaver dogs. But they unearthed nothing. No remains, no implement of violence, no indication of a struggle. Only a vacant home and a shattered, grieving husband. He had given his full cooperation to the investigation, answering their questions with unwavering honesty, providing every explanation he could muster. He had even subjected himself to a polygraph examination, which he passed, though he knew its value was negligible in the grand scheme. The dearth of evidence proved to be his undoing. Lacking a corpse, lacking a crime scene, the authorities could not substantiate a case. They couldn't indict him for murder, but neither could they exonerate him. And so, he remained suspended in a perpetual state of uncertainty, his existence irrevocably warped. The sole unusual element was a quaint, antique music box that Amelia had treasured. It was gone. He had informed the detectives about it, but they dismissed it as inconsequential. A burglar, they proposed, may have broken in and stolen it. But Arthur knew Amelia. She never left that music box exposed. It was invariably secured in a locked drawer, concealed from inquisitive eyes. He could not dispel the sense that the music box held some crucial significance, that it was a cipher to understanding Amelia's fate. He attempted communication with Amelia's family, but they cast blame squarely on him. Her sister, Eleanor, had been particularly vitriolic, accusing him of engineering Amelia's demise. He understood their anguish, their need to assign responsibility, but their accusations merely deepened his own sense of culpability and isolation. He eventually ceased all attempts to reach them. Now, as he surveyed the desolate vista, Arthur felt a familiar wave of despair envelop him. He was imprisoned within this house, haunted by the wraith of his wife and the burden of his own suspicions. He yearned for tranquility, for redemption, but he recognized that neither would ever be his. Not until the truth regarding Amelia's disappearance surfaced, and he harbored a deep-seated fear that that truth was something he could never confront. A ghost at the door. The tempest hammered the house, each squall a fist against the aged window panes. Arthur remained motionless in his armchair, the radio's muted murmur a fragile defense against the storm's assault. Outside, the wind keened, a desolate sound that mirrored the hollowness within him. A decade of identical downpours, each echoing the night Amelia was lost. Visitors were the last thing he anticipated. Not this night, not ever. The townsfolk, once sympathetic, had retreated into distance, their concern replaced by suspicion and then a careful avoidance. He existed as a phantom in their minds, a shadow haunting the periphery of their lives. A brisk knock on the door fractured the storm's savage orchestra. He went rigid. A delivery? Unthinkable at this hour. A crueliste. Possible even for this town. He stilled himself, praying for the wind to be the culprit, for the creaks of the old house under duress to be the source. Another summons, louder, more insistent this time. His pulse quickened, a trapped thing fluttering against his ribs. He hadn't received a caller in time, had blurred into an indistinguishable stretch. He stood slowly, his limbs protesting the motion, and traversed the room, each step a laborious undertaking. He reached the portal, his hand unsteady as he grasped the cold metal. Doubt snagged at him. What if it were Amelia's kin, arriving to hurl another accusation, another silent condemnation? Or a journalist, eager to exhume the past and craft a sensational story? He peered through the peephole, but rain obscured the view, offering only a warped glimpse of the porch. He discerned nothing. Summoning resolve, he steeled himself and twisted the knob. The door yielded, revealing a figure limned against the raging night. Rain lashed around her, darkening her hair and clinging it to her face. She shuddered, her garments saturated, outlining her form. He froze, his mind struggling to grasp the sight before him, his breath seized in his chest. Impossible. Amelia, he breathed, the name of frail supplication. The woman blinked, her gaze unfocused, bewildered. She regarded him with a guileless innocence, so unlike the sharp, knowing look he remembered. I couldn't say, she mumbled, her voice raspy. I don't recognize the name, or who I am, truthfully. He widened the opening, allowing more light to illuminate her features, scrutinizing her for recognition, a spark of the familiar. Yet her face remained vacant, her eyes reflecting a profound emptiness. Still, it was her. The set of her jaw, the slight incline of her nose, the delicate dusting of freckles across her face. Undeniably Amelia. Altered, age perhaps, worn by time, but Amelia. "Come in," he uttered, his voice strained with disbelief. He receded, indicating she should enter. She lingered momentarily, then crossed the threshold, leaving a damp trail on the time-worn floorboards. He secured the door, isolating them from the tempest, but within him a fiercer storm still surged. He guided her to the living room, his mind struggling to reconcile reality. She stood there, soaked and trembling, her eyes sweeping the space with a confused expression. "This place," she murmured, her brow furrowed in concentration. "It resonates somehow familiar, though I don't have a reason why." He indicated the armchair he had recently vacated. "Please sit. I'll find a blanket." He hastened to the linen cupboard, his hands trembling as he procured a heavy woolen wrap. He draped it around her shoulders, tried to ignore the shivers that coursed through her. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hushed. He lowered himself before her, his gaze searching her eyes. "What is the most recent thing you can recall?" She closed her eyes tightly, her face etched with effort. "Nothing," she whispered, her voice tinged with agony. "Only fragments, glimpses of trees, water, and a sensation of sheer terror." He reached out and clasped her hand, his fingers feeling the delicate bones beneath her skin. Her flesh was cold, slick. It was her hand, he felt certain. But the woman who possessed it was a stranger. "Do you recognize me?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Her eyes opened, locking onto his. He held his breath, anticipating an ember of recognition, a flicker of warmth. But her gaze remained untouched, absent of any emotion. "I don't believe so," she answered softly. "I am sorry. I have no memories." A dizzy spell assailed him. He clutched the chair's arm, fighting to remain stable. It was Amelia, yet she didn't know him. She didn't recall their shared history. She recollected nothing. "Amnesia," she offered, as if divining his thoughts. "That's what the physician determined. Before I departed." "Departed where?" he asked, his voice rough. She shook her head, her face a portrait of confusion. "I don't recall. I simply awoke, in a town a few miles away. In the hospital, they related that I had been found wandering by the river. I didn't know my identity, my origins, anything." He stared, his mind reeling. 10 years. 10 years of searching, hoping, and ultimately despairing. And now, here she stood, seemingly resurrected, yet a mere echo of her former self. "Why did you come here?" he asked, his voice wavering. Her gaze drifted around the room once more, lingering on the photographs adorning the mantelpiece, the faded wallpaper, the familiar furnishings. "I don't know," she whispered. Something lured me here. An impression, like this is where I belong, like this place is home." Echoes of the past. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed midnight, each resonant bong a hammer blow against Arthur's already frayed nerves. He watched the woman, Amelia, as she tentatively touched the worn banister of the staircase, her brow furrowed. "Careful," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "It's older than I am." She looked up, her eyes, the same startling shade of emerald he'd lost himself in 1,000 times, questioning. "It feels familiar," she said, the word hesitant, as if tasting its flavor. The wood, the grain. He led her through the house, a hushed tour of their shared history, a history she seemingly no longer possessed. In the living room, he pointed to the faded patch on the rug where their clumsy puppy, Barnaby, had chewed relentlessly as a pup. He never did learn not to. Arthur chuckled softly. She smiled, a fleeting, ghost-like expression that sent a jolt through him. "Barnaby," she murmured, her fingers tracing the outline of the faded patch. "He used to nip at my ankles when I tried to read." Arthur stopped, his breath catching in his throat. He hadn't mentioned Barnaby's habit of ankle biting. It was a small, insignificant detail, the kind that only someone who'd lived it would know. "Hope," A fragile, wounded bird fluttered within him. He showed her the kitchen, the garden, each room a repository of memories, each object a potential trigger. He told her about their mismatched mugs, her preference for Earl Grey, his for strong black coffee. He spoke of their shared love for gardening, their disastrous attempt at growing tomatoes, the way she used to hum while she weeded. She listened, her expression a shifting landscape of confusion, curiosity, and something else, a flicker of recognition. Once, while he was describing their annual bonfire night tradition, she gasped softly, clutching her head. "Fireworks," she whispered, her voice strained. "Red and gold, and the smell of smoke." But then, there are the inconsistencies. He showed her Amelia's favorite painting, a watercolor of the Cornish coast, a gift from her father. She stared at it blankly. "It's nice," she said finally, her tone devoid of any emotion. Amelia had adored that painting. Later, as Arthur was preparing the spare bedroom, he found her standing in the doorway of their old bedroom, a room he hadn't entered in years. The moonlight streamed through the window, bathing her in an ethereal glow. "This room," she began, her voice barely audible. "It feels wrong." Arthur's heart sank. Wrong? It was the room where they had laughed, loved, built a life together. He forced a smile. "It's just been closed up for a while. Needs airing out." He made up the spare bed with fresh linen, trying to ignore the knot of unease tightening in his stomach. He offered her a sleeping draught, but she refused, claiming she never took medication. But Amelia had always kept a bottle of chamomile pills on her nightstand for restless nights. He lay awake long after she had retired, listening to the wind howling outside, mimicking the turmoil within him. Every creak of the house sounded amplified. Every shadow seemed to dance with malevolent intent. Doubts gnawed at him. Was he simply projecting his desires onto a stranger, desperate to resurrect a ghost? Then he heard it, a faint whisper, seemingly coming from inside the walls. He held his breath, straining to decipher the sound. It was barely audible, a sibilant murmur, but he thought he could distinguish a single word: Arthur. He shot out of bed, his heart pounding, and crept into the hallway. The whispering had stopped. He glanced towards the spare bedroom. She was asleep, her face serene in the moonlight. He moved towards their old bedroom. The door was slightly ajar. Pushing it open, the room was exactly as he'd left it, unchanged. As he stepped back into the hall, a framed photograph on a nearby table suddenly toppled over, shattering against the floor. It was a picture of Amelia, taken on their wedding day. Arthur stared at the broken glass, his mind reeling. It could have been the wind, a loose nail, anything, but a cold dread gripped him. It felt deliberate. He knelt down to pick up the pieces, his fingers trembling. As he gathered the shards of glass, he noticed something odd about the photograph itself. Behind Amelia's smiling face, almost imperceptible, was a faint, dark smudge, like a shadow lurking just beneath the surface. It hadn't been there before, he was sure of it. He stood up, clutching the broken photograph, his gaze fixed on the closed door of the spare bedroom. Was it Amelia? Or was something else entirely at play? He knew one thing. He was no longer sure he wanted to know the answer. The detectives returned. The stale coffee tasted like ash in Detective Maxwell's mouth, a fitting accompaniment to the morning's grim headlines. Another teenager gone missing, another family shattered. He'd seen too much of it in his 20 years on the force. He was about to toss the paper when a small item in the local section caught his eye. Penhaligon recluse claims wife returns after decade. Maxwell snorted. Penhaligon. That name hadn't crossed his desk in years. Not since Amelia Penhaligon vanished without a trace, leaving behind a husband who reeked of grief and suspicion in equal measure. The case had been a black mark on his record, the one that got away. He'd followed every lead, interviewed every neighbor, and even subjected Arthur Penhaligon to a polygraph, which the man had passed. Damn him. The townsfolk, of course, had already convicted Arthur in their minds, whispering about a lover's quarrel turned deadly. But Maxwell needed proof, and proof had been frustratingly absent. He reread the article, his gut twisting with a familiar unease. A decade. 10 years without a word. And then she just reappears, suffering from amnesia, no less. It stank of something rotten. Too convenient. He tossed the paper onto his overflowing desk. The image of Arthur Penhaligon's haunted eyes burned into his memory. Time to pay an old friend a visit. The Penhaligon house hadn't changed. Still the same faded blue paint, the same overgrown garden choked with weeds. It looked like a place time forgot, or perhaps a place time actively avoided. He walked up the creaking porch steps and rapped on the door, the sound echoing in the unsettling silence. Arthur answered, his face etched with a mixture of surprise and something akin to dread. "Detective Maxwell," he said, his voice raspy. "What brings you here?" "Just checking in, Mr. Penhaligon," Maxwell said, his tone deliberately casual. "Heard some interesting news. Thought I'd see how things are going." Arthur hesitated, then opened the door wider. "Come in." The interior was dim and cluttered, filled with dusty furniture and the scent of old books. In the living room, a woman sat by the window, bathed in the pale morning light. She had Arthur's dark hair, but her eyes were a startling, almost unnatural shade of green. "Amelia," Arthur said, his voice softening. "This is Detective Maxwell. He investigated your disappearance." Amelia looked at Maxwell, her expression blank. "I don't remember," she said, her voice a soft whisper. Maxwell nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the room. "Of course. Amnesia, I understand. Quite a story, Mrs. Penhaligon." He paused, letting the silence hang in the air. "Or should I say Mississippi?" Arthur stiffened. "She's Amelia," he said sharply. "She's my wife." "That's what you say," Maxwell replied, his gaze unwavering. He turned his attention to Amelia. "Perhaps you could tell me a little about yourself, Mrs. Penhaligon? Anything at all that comes to mind." Amelia frowned, her brow furrowing in concentration. I remember liking the smell of rain on the pavement," she said, and a feeling of being lost. Very, very lost." Maxwell scribbled in his notebook. "Interesting. Anything else?" She shook her head, her eyes clouding with frustration. "It's all a blur. Like a dream I can't quite grasp." The interview continued for another hour, Maxwell probing for inconsistencies, for any slip-up that would betray a lie. He asked about their wedding, their first date, Amelia's family. Arthur answered most of the questions, his voice strained, while Amelia struggled to recall even the simplest details. Back at the station, Maxwell pulled out the old case files, the yellowed pages filled with witness statements, crime scene photos, and his own meticulous notes. He reread Amelia's family statements from 10 years ago. They spoke of a headstrong, independent woman, fiercely loyal to her friends and family. The woman in Arthur's living room seemed different, subdued, almost fragile. He found a transcript of his original interview with Arthur. Arthur had insisted Amelia had been planning to leave him, that she'd been unhappy for months. A point of contention Maxwell had never quite bought. Now, rereading it, he noticed something he'd missed before. Arthur had mentioned a specific shade of lipstick Amelia always wore, a vibrant crimson called Dragon's Breath. He checked his notes from the interview with the returned Amelia. When asked about her favorite lipstick, she had described a soft, rosy pink. Small detail, perhaps, but it gnawed at him. He leaned back in his chair, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The case was cold, buried under a decade of dust and unanswered questions. But something felt different now. The woman in that house wasn't Amelia. Or, if she was, something deeply disturbing had happened to her. And Detective Maxwell had a feeling he was about to find out what. The air in the room felt thick, heavy with the weight of unanswered questions and the promise of something darker to come. Secrets in the attic. A glacial unease settled deep within Arthur, a knot of dread tightening with each pulse. Maxwell's visit had been disquieting enough, the detective's courteous inquiry humming with a subtle accusation he couldn't shake. The lipstick. He replayed the exchange, that innocuous question now ablaze like a signal flare. Answers were paramount, and if Amelia refused to volunteer them, he'd have to unearth them himself. The attic, Amelia's avoided sanctuary. a place she claimed sent shivers down her spine. A neglected archive of their shared history, thick with grime and obscured in gloom. Years had elapsed since he last ventured up there. The folding stairs protested with a drawn-out groan as he tugged them down, the air instantly turning frigid and dense. A pungent reek of moth repellent and decay permeated the atmosphere. He flicked on the bare bulb dangling precariously from a beam, unleashing elongated, animated shadows that twisted familiar forms into grotesque apparitions. Crates brimmed with discarded Yuletide ornaments, time-worn photo albums, and moth-eaten garments. Methodically, he began sifting, his hands accumulating layers of grime with each passing moment. He hunted for anything that might illuminate the discrepancies, something to either confirm Maxwell's misgivings or lay them to rest. Hours trickled away. Dust motes swirled in the meager light, provoking sneezes and irritating his eyes. He exhumed a chest crammed with Amelia's youthful journals, their leather covers flaking and scored. He paused, conflicted. To read them felt like an invasion, yet the hunger for truth eclipsed his hesitation. He flipped open the first one, the fragile pages filled with her elegant script. He scanned entries detailing aspirations, fantasies, and concerns. Nothing remarkable surfaced. He shut it, a wave of compunction gnawing at him. Just as he was ready to concede defeat, he spotted a diminutive, wooden box tucked far in the back, nearly obscured by a pile of old canvases. Intricately carved with climbing roses and twining vines, its wood bore the patina of age. It was unfamiliar, not something they'd ever purchased together. Raising the lid, he found letters nestled on a bed of threadbare velvet. The handwriting on the envelopes was unknown, bold and graceful. Each addressed to "My dearest Amelia." His pulse hammered against his ribs. He picked one up, his fingers trembling. The postmark read Paris. He ripped it open. "My love," the letter began, "I yearn for the day we can finally be together, liberated from the shackles of our lives. The thought of holding you once more sustains me during these interminable, solitary nights. Soon, my darling, soon. Éternel Yule, Jean-Luc." He dropped the missive as if branded. Jean-Luc? Paris? He feverishly scrambled through the pile, each letter echoing similar pronouncements of affection and longing. The dates etched a timeline spanning years, concluding mere months before Amelia vanished. The air in the attic pressed down, stifling him. He collapsed onto a dusty trunk, the letters cascading around him like withered leaves. A surge of nausea churned in his stomach. Betrayal. The word reverberated within his mind. Had Amelia been involved in an affair? Was this Jean-Luc a potential suspect in her disappearance? A motive revealed at last. Someone who desired her gone. He had to confront her. Immediately, he lurched down the attic stairs, his thoughts swirling. He found Amelia in the garden, tending the roses. The waning sunlight painted her face with a golden hue, lending her an almost ethereal beauty. "Amelia," he managed, his voice raspy. She turned, a soft smile gracing her lips. "Arthur, is everything all right? You look unwell." He extended the letters, his hand shaking. "Who is Jean-Luc?" Her smile wavered, supplanted by a fleeting emotion he struggled to define. Apprehension? Bewilderment? "Jean-Luc? I don't recognize that name." "Don't lie to me," he barked, his voice escalating. "These are billets due, Amelia, from a man residing in Paris. Addressed to you." She recoiled, her eyes widening. "Arthur, I swear, I've never laid eyes on these before. I'm at a loss." "Then elucidate." He shoved the correspondence closer, his rage bubbling over. "Explain why you were receiving declarations of love from another man while married to me." She regarded the letters, her face blanching. I can't. I told you I don't recall." She wrung her hands, her voice faltering. "Please, Arthur, you must believe me. I don't know this Jean-Luc." "Believe you," he scoffed. "After the charade? After the lipstick, the inconsistencies, the fabrications? How can I possibly credit a word you say?" Tears welled, shimmering in her eyes. "I'm not prevaricating, Arthur. I swear." Please, grant me a chance. Help me to remember. He scrutinized her, truly observed her. Was she truthful? Was she genuinely an amnesiac victim, or a masterful deceiver? Doubt gnawed at him, a relentless, insidious parasite. Who are you? He whispered, the question hanging suspended in the air like a specter. The sunlight seemed to dull, casting protracted, ominous shadows that stretched across the grounds, mirroring the gloom that had seeped into his very soul. The fragrance of roses, once a comforting touchstone to Amelia, now felt like a stifling shroud. The twins' confession. The teacup rattled in Arthur's hand, sloshing lukewarm tea onto the worn floral carpet. He barely noticed. The love letters, still clutched in his other hand, felt like burning coals. Jean-Luc, he repeated, the name a foreign, bitter taste on his tongue. Across the small kitchen table, Amelia didn't flinch. Her gaze, usually soft and questioning, was now hard, almost defiant. So you found them. It wasn't a question. Who are you? The words clawed their way out of Arthur's throat, raw with disbelief and a burgeoning fear he couldn't name. Detective Maxwell's visit earlier that day echoed in his mind, amplifying the doubt that had been gnawing at him. He thought of Amelia, his Amelia, and a fresh wave of grief washed over him. She sighed, a sound that held a world of weariness. Reaching up, she unpinned her hair. It cascaded down her shoulders, a slightly different shade of brown than Amelia's, less sun-kissed, more chestnut. Then, she removed the subtle padding she'd been wearing around her jawline and cheeks. The transformation was subtle, but undeniable. The familiar softness of Amelia dissolved, revealing sharper angles, a stronger bone structure. "My name is Clara," she said, her voice suddenly deeper, more resonant. Clara Moreau, Amelia's twin sister. The air in the kitchen seemed to thicken, pressing down on Arthur's chest. Twins. He remembered Amelia mentioning a sister, once long ago. A sister she hadn't seen in years. This is impossible. Is it? Clara retorted, her eyes flashing. Is it really more impossible than the idea that Amelia would simply vanish into thin air, leaving you without a word? She leaned forward, her gaze intense. I came here because I needed to know what happened to her, and I suspected you weren't telling the whole truth. A dizzying flashback assaulted Arthur. He saw Amelia, younger, vibrant, standing on the windswept cliffs overlooking the sea. Beside her stood a woman, a mirror image, but with a fire in her eyes that Amelia lacked. They were arguing, their voices snatched away by the wind. He couldn't hear the words, but the tension between them was palpable, a visible force. He remembered Amelia turning away, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. We weren't close, Clara said, as if reading his thoughts. Amelia always got everything. The attention, the love. Even Jean-Luc for a while. She was the golden child, and I was just the other one. She paused, a flicker of pain crossing her face. But she was still my sister. And when she disappeared, I knew something was wrong. The police investigation went nowhere. You seemed strangely unaffected. So, I decided to investigate myself. You impersonated her? Arthur asked, his voice barely a whisper. I had to get close to you, to see if you knew more than you were letting on. Clara stood up, pacing the small kitchen like a caged animal. The amnesia was a ruse, a way to observe you, to test your reactions. The details I gave her things Amelia told me years ago, but there were inconsistencies, deliberate ones, to see if you would notice. Arthur sank into his chair, his head spinning. The carefully constructed reality he had clung to for 10 years was crumbling before his eyes. But why? Why would you think I had something to do with her disappearance? Clara stopped pacing and fixed him with a piercing stare. Because, Arthur, Amelia was planning to leave you. I found a letter she wrote, hidden in her things. She was going to meet Jean-Luc in Paris. She felt trapped, stifled. And I think you knew. I think you confronted her. And I think something terrible happened. Arthur recoiled, knocking over his teacup. The brown liquid spread across the floor, staining the already faded pattern. That's a lie. Amelia loved me. Did she? Or did she love the security you provided? The quiet life? The truth is, Arthur, you were comfortable. Predictable. Amelia craved something more, and you couldn't give it to her. Clara's voice was devoid of emotion, a clinical assessment of a broken marriage. She reached into her bag and pulled out a photograph. It was Amelia, laughing, her eyes sparkling, her arm around a handsome man with dark hair and a mischievous grin. Jean-Luc. This was taken a week before she disappeared. She looked happy, Arthur. Truly happy. Something I hadn't seen in years. Clara tossed the photograph onto the table. Tell me, Arthur, what really happened to Amelia? Because I don't believe for a second that she simply walked away. She crossed her arms, waiting, her gaze unwavering. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the frantic thumping of Arthur's heart. He knew, with chilling certainty, that Clara wouldn't leave until she got the truth. A truth he had buried so deep, he had almost convinced himself it didn't exist. But now, staring into the eyes of Amelia's twin, he knew he could no longer hide. The past had come back to haunt him, and this time, it wouldn't be silenced. A web of debt and lies. Where did you unearth these? Arthur's query was a strangled rasp, his gaze flickering between the incriminating array spread across the mahogany surface and Clara's unwavering scrutiny. Bank records, life assurance documents, frantic scribbles of calculations. His meticulously concealed downfall was laid bare. Clara crossed her arms, a movement as crisp as breaking ice. Does the source truly concern you? The crux of the matter lies in their content. Arthur, you were drowning, spiraling into ruin. And Amelia possessed a rather generous life insurance policy, wouldn't you agree? He flinched, the blood leaching from his complexion. That's preposterous. You suspect. He choked on the unfinished accusation, a miasma of implication filling the space. Did you realize, Arthur, Clara continued, her tone a velvet caress laced with steel, that the proceeds would have miraculously evaporated your monetary woes? No more creditors snapping at your heels. No more nights racked with anxiety over repossession. Simply, resolution. The final word dripped with glacial calm. No. Arthur's fist slammed against the tabletop, a jolt that sent the delicate teacups dancing. A fabrication. I cherished Amelia. I would never. Cherished. Clara's lip curled in disdain. Is that your euphemism? My understanding suggests a version of affection steeped in deception, burgeoning debt, and driving a woman to the precipice. Did you imagine her oblivious to the pressure? Arthur, did you mistake her for blind? He surged to his feet, pacing the confines of the room, raking agitated fingers through his already disheveled locks. I faltered. I concede that, but I was striving to rectify things. We were working through it together. Indeed, or was she charting a course to freedom? Clara retrieved a small, folded slip of paper, nestled within her jewelry chest, addressed to a barrister in London. Regarding dissolution of marriage proceedings, Arthur arrested his pacing, presenting his back to her. Silence descended, thick with unspoken charges. Eventually, he pivoted, his eyes brimming with supplication. It wasn't like that, Clara. I implore you, you must believe me. We argued, vehemently so, a dreadful quarrel, but I laid no hand on her. The words hung suspended, a fragile bulwark against the gathering storm of accusations. Recreate it for me, Clara requested, her voice soft, yet resolute. Show me the altercation. Show me the essence of truth. The room fractured, the lavish drawing room, the damning exhibits, Clara's accusatory presence, all dissolved, supplanted by the softly illuminated study, the atmosphere heavy with unvoiced stress. The night Amelia vanished. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Another demand for payment? Arthur? Truly? I thought you assured me you were managing this. Amelia's tone possessed a razor's edge, honed by an exhaustion that pierced deeper than outright blame. Arthur sank deeper into his chair, the accounts before him resembling a ravaged battlefield. I am managing. I merely require a modicum more time. Time? Time has run out, Arthur. The bank is poised to seize the house. My personal funds have been depleted. What further sacrifices must we endure before you confront reality? Don't address me in that manner, he retorted, his temper igniting. I'm exerting every possible effort. No, you are not. You are concealing. You are prevaricating. You are burying your consciousness in delusion while our very existence disintegrates around us. Amelia's voice escalated, fracturing with pent-up distress. She traversed the room, her hands clenching and unclenching in spasmodic motions. I can no longer endure this, Arthur. It is simply beyond my capabilities. So, your intention is to simply abandon ship? Leave me to grapple with this debacle? Perhaps it is my destined course. Perhaps I should have embarked upon it long prior. The words resonated, laden with a painful verity. I'm suffocating within these walls, Arthur. Submerged beneath your debt, your shrouded secrets, Her voice trailed off, unable to articulate the depth of her despair. He rose, his countenance a mask of both rage and desperation. Where would you flee? What course of action would you pursue? That ceases to be your prerogative, does it not? Her voice was frigid, devoid of sentiment. I have made arrangements. I am departing. A decision overdue. Departing? Abandoning me? After all we have weathered. His voice was laced with disbelief, wounded pride bleeding through the cracks. What we, Arthur? The illusion of we no longer exists. There remains only you and your catastrophe. He advanced, his hands extending in a gesture of supplication. Amelia, I beseech you desist from this course. We possess the capacity to salvage this situation. We can initiate anew. She recoiled from his touch, her eyes reflecting a fusion of sorrow and unwavering resolve. It has surpassed the point of remediation, Arthur. That point was eclipsed long hence. She pivoted and proceeded toward the doorway, her silhouette outlined against the illumination spilling from the hallway. I am finished. The door clicked shut, abandoning Arthur to the solitary confines of the dimly illuminated study, encircled by the wreckage of his existence. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The vision dissipated. Arthur stood in the present, his respiration coming in ragged gasps, the recollection of fresh, unhealed wound. I swear it, Clara, he breathed, his voice raspy. That is the narrative. She departed. I did not impede her. I did nothing. A sharp percussion against the front door reverberated throughout the dwelling. Arthur froze, his eyes widening with sudden alarm. Clara's expression hardened into granite. That will be Detective Maxwell. I summoned him. Arthur's complexion drained of color. You what? Clara? No, you cannot. I avow I committed no crime. Then you possess no cause for apprehension. Do you, Arthur? Clara responded, her voice coated with an Arctic certainty. Recount the truth. Recount everything. The trap is set. Let's take a walk, Clara said, her voice dangerously soft. Arthur balked. Now, it's getting dark. He gestured vaguely towards the window, though the curtains were drawn, obscuring the twilight. He was sweating, she noticed, a sheen slicking his forehead despite the cool air in the house. The phone call to Maxwell had rattled him more than he let on. Yes, now, Clara insisted, rising from the armchair. Remember how much Amelia loved the beach at sunset? We haven't been there once since I came back. She forced the words, knowing they were a calculated cruelty. Arthur swallowed hard. I thought you were tired. Tired? After all this time, Arthur, I'm just getting started. She moved towards the door, not waiting for him. He followed, a reluctant shadow trailing her. Outside, the air was thick with the smell of salt and damp earth. The wind had picked up, whipping strands of Clara's hair across her face. She didn't bother to tuck them back, letting the wind mirror the chaos she was stirring within him. They walked in silence towards the familiar path leading to the beach, a path Amelia had walked so many times before. It's getting cold, Arthur mumbled, pulling his jacket tighter around himself. Clara ignored him. As they neared the cliff edge overlooking the beach, she stopped. The waves crashed against the shore below, a relentless rhythm of water against stone. The sky was bruised with purple and orange, a dramatic backdrop to their tense encounter. "Remember this spot, Arthur?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the wind. Amelia loved to stand here, watching the sunset. Arthur shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, I remember." He avoided her gaze, focusing on the turbulent sea. Clara took a step closer to the edge, feigning a blissful sigh. "It's just like I remember it. So peaceful." She knew he was watching her, his anxiety palpable. "We haven't talked much about that night, have we, Arthur? The night I disappeared." He flinched. "There's nothing to talk about. You went for a walk. You lost your way." Clara laughed, a short, sharp sound that cut through the air. "Lost my way? On a beach I'd walked 1,000 times? Is that really what you think happened?" He didn't answer. She turned to face him, her eyes narrowed. "Let's recreate it, Arthur. Let's pretend it's that night again. Walk with me." She started along the path that wound down to the beach, forcing him to follow. The sand was cold beneath their feet, the wind biting at their exposed skin. Clara walked quickly, forcing Arthur to struggle to keep up. She led him to a secluded cove, hidden by jagged rocks and shrouded in shadow. This was where Amelia often came to collect sea glass, a peaceful sanctuary away from the world. "Here," Clara said, stopping abruptly. "This is where I would have been, searching for my treasures." "You were where, Arthur? What were you doing?" He wrung his hands, his face pale in the fading light. I was waiting for you back at the house." "Waiting? Or were you watching? Were you planning?" She stepped closer, invading his personal space. He stumbled backward, his heel catching on a rock. "Clara, stop it," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "You're scaring me." "Scared? You should be," she hissed, her voice low and dangerous. "Imagine it, Arthur. The waves crashing, the wind howling, no one around to hear. Perfect, isn't it?" He looked around, his eyes darting nervously. The cove felt claustrophobic, the shadows closing in around them. The sound of the waves seemed to amplify, mocking him with their relentless rhythm. "This isn't you, Amelia," he stammered. "You wouldn't do this." Clara smiled, a cruel, unsettling expression that had nothing to do with Amelia. "You're right, Arthur. I'm not Amelia. I'm her twin sister, and I'm here to find out what really happened to her." She pulled out a small, waterproof flashlight and shone it directly in his face. "Tell me, Arthur, did she fall? Or did you push?" He shielded his eyes, his breathing ragged. "I didn't do anything. She left. She just left. Left with nothing? No clothes, no money, no goodbye? Is that what you expect me to believe?" Clara advanced on him, the beam of the flashlight unwavering. "Tell me the truth, Arthur. Tell me what you did to my sister." He backed away until he was pressed against the cold, damp rock face, trapped. Panic flared in his eyes. I can't," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Clara pressed closer, her face inches from his. "Yes, you can, Arthur. You have to. Because whether you tell me now, or you tell Detective Maxwell later, the truth will come out. The trap is set, Arthur, and you're caught in it." The only sound was the crashing of the waves, a constant, unforgiving reminder of the secrets hidden beneath the surface. And in Arthur's eyes, Clara saw a flicker of something she had been searching for. Not grief, not confusion, but raw, unadulterated fear. The kind of fear that only comes from knowing you are about to be exposed. Confession and capture. The surf hammered the shore, a brutal counterpoint to the storm raging inside Arthur. Clara's accusations, like shards of broken glass, had undermined his carefully constructed composure. He recoiled, the yielding sand offering little purchase. "I didn't kill her," he mumbled, the denial ringing false even to him. Those eyes, Clara's, Amelia's, bore into him. "Then enlighten me. Arthur, what transpired that night?" He winced, the memory a turbulent whirlpool of guilt. The argument, ignited by debt and desperation, had been vicious, but the aftermath unspeakable. "I saw her," he choked out, the confession a physical wrench. "She left. With Elias Thorne." A tense silence descended, heavy with unspoken charges. Clara's features remained inscrutable, but Arthur felt crushed by her condemnation. He looked up, begging for a forgiveness he hadn't earned. "I swear, Clara. Amelia, I swear I was ignorant of her destination. I was merely enraged, perhaps relieved that the conflict had ceased." Disbelief tightened Clara's face. "Relieved? Your wife departs into the night with another man, and relief is your response." He raked a hand across his brow, the abrasive sand chafing his skin. I should have intervened, should have pursued her, but I remained still." He hugged himself, a desperate attempt at self-preservation. A bone-deep chill permeated him. Gravel crunched under tires, shattering the taut atmosphere. Headlights raked across the scene, turning the beach into a makeshift stage. Arthur's pulse leaped. "Maxwell." Clara retreated a step, her eyes reflecting a strange blend of triumph and unease. "Seems we have company," she observed, her tone devoid of inflection. Arthur watched, transfixed, as Maxwell exited the vehicle, his expression granite. He moved with purpose, the flashlight beam slicing through the gloom. "Mr. Penhaligon." Maxwell greeted him, his voice glacial. "We need to have a conversation." Arthur swallowed hard, the recent confession still burning in his throat. "Detective, I can provide context." Maxwell ignored the plea, his gaze sweeping the tableau. He noted Clara, standing a small distance away, her face unreadable. "Does this, perhaps, relate to the renewed investigation into your wife's disappearance?" Arthur's breath caught. He shot a glance at Clara, a silent appeal for succor, but she remained a statue. He knew, with chilling certainty, he was utterly alone. I've told you, detective. She vanished. I have no idea where she went." He fought to maintain composure, but a tremor betrayed him. Maxwell advanced, his eyes locking onto Arthur's. "That's curious, Mr. Penhaligon, because the present narrative differs considerably from your account a decade ago." A pause, the words hanging like a threat. "Withholding information, providing perjured testimony. These are crimes, Mr. Penhaligon. Obstruction of justice. And after 10 years, it's time we rectified the record. Wouldn't you agree?" Arthur's limbs felt weighted. He yearned to flee, to vanish into the inky blackness, but found himself rooted. He opened his mouth to speak, to beg, but words evaporated. "Arthur, speak the truth," Clara urged softly, her voice carrying a note he couldn't quite place. He gazed at her, confusion battling despair. Could she truly be Amelia? Or was she an imposter, enacting some elaborate, cruel charade? Maxwell closed the gap, his hand hovering near his sidearm. "Mr. Penhaligon, one final time. What actually happened to your wife, Amelia?" Arthur's resistance buckled. He was weary of lies, weary of evasion. He squeezed his eyes shut, the image of Amelia departing with Thorn branded on his mind. "I told you. I witnessed her departure with him." Maxwell's face hardened into an expression of grim satisfaction. "And this pertinent detail eluded you for 10 years. He shook his head, a hint of contempt flickering in his eyes. "Arthur Penhaligon, you are under arrest for obstruction of justice." He felt the cold bite of steel cuffs encircling his wrists. The click echoed in the stillness, a final, damning pronouncement. As Maxwell escorted him toward the vehicle, Arthur risked a look at Clara. Her face was ashen, her eyes a labyrinth of emotions. Maybe relief, but also a profound disappointment. He was being led away, but the charge remained unclear. Was it for truth? For justice? Or was he simply a pawn sacrificed in a game beyond his comprehension? Clara watched the taillights of the police car vanish down the drive, swallowed by the darkness. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering despite the warmth of the night. She had sought answers, demanded recompense, but standing alone on the beach, she felt as though she had only grazed the surface of an infinitely darker truth. The truth unburied. The letterbox's clang shattered the morning stillness, a jarring intrusion into Arthur's solitude. Even without touching it, he recognized Maxwell's handwriting. The detective was a man of his word, for good or ill, keeping Arthur abreast of developments. The cream envelope, lying innocently on the floor, felt like a brand, a physical manifestation of his secrets. Sleep had become a luxury since the arrest. Now, every house groan and leaf whisper morphed into phantom footsteps, the oppressive weight of impending judgment. Far away, Clara hunted a phantom, Elias Thorne, a name barely audible in the dusty police archives, a fleeting mention linked to Amelia's vanishing. But a decade of simmering fury, fueled by sisterly devotion, wouldn't let her relent. Years spent cultivating contacts, gathering shards of information, had led her here. Working under the guise of Amelia, gnawed at her core, a necessary sacrifice for the truth. Elias, she discovered, was a two-bit grifter, perpetually skirting disaster. He drifted from town to town, leaving behind a wake of debts and broken promises. Clara finally cornered him in a dismal Birmingham boarding house. The air was thick enough to taste, stale tobacco and desperation clinging to the walls. Her knock echoed, sharp and demanding. Elias opened the door, surprise etching itself onto his features. Smaller than anticipated, a nervous tick caused his eyelid to twitch erratically. He resembled a trapped rodent. "Yes," he managed, his voice thin and wavering. Clara bypassed greetings. "Elias Thorne? This concerns Amelia Penhaligon." His complexion paled, leaching away any semblance of color. He stuttered, I don't know any Amelia Penhaligon." Clara brushed past him, entering the cramped space. A bare room, containing only a bed, a wobbly table, and a threadbare armchair. The stench of unwashed laundry and cheap lager permeated everything. "Don't insult my intelligence, Elias. I know you were acquainted with her. I know you saw her the night she disappeared." He recoiled, his hands trembling visibly. "I swear I didn't. I wouldn't." Clara advanced, her tone dropping to a dangerous murmur. "Tell me what occurred, Elias. Recount every detail." The floodgates burst open. Years of suppressed guilt erupted in a torrent of fragmented sentences. He'd been strapped for cash, he confessed, and Amelia had been wearing an expensive necklace. He'd planned a simple mugging, a quick snatch and run. She'd resisted, and during the struggle, he'd panicked. A tragic mistake, he insisted, a horrifying accident. He never intended to kill her. He'd concealed her body in a shallow grave just outside town in the woods. Clara absorbed the information, her heart a cold, dense weight. The unearthed truth proved more savage than she'd imagined. She compelled herself to remain composed, extracting every painful detail, every agonizing moment. When he finished, she simply nodded and departed, leaving him weeping amid the squalor. Back in Port Agnes, Arthur walked free. Maxwell, his expression somber, delivered the news. A confession secured. Amelia's remains recovered. He was at liberty. The initial relief quickly dissolved into profound sorrow. He had loved Amelia in his own imperfect way, and the realization of her violent, senseless end was almost more than he could bear. He drove directly to the cemetery, to Amelia's final resting place. The headstone stood stark and unadorned, bearing only her name and dates. He knelt before it, the ground cool and moist beneath his knees. "I'm sorry, Amelia," he rasped, his voice thick with grief. "I should have spoken up. I should have shielded you." He lingered there, consumed by memories, the good times, the bad, the laughter, the tears. The suppressed truth had finally risen to the surface, bringing with it a wave of anguish and a fragile sense of resolution. Months later, Clara stood before a gathering, her voice resounding, unwavering. The Amelia Moreau Foundation for Missing Persons was officially unveiled. It would furnish resources and assistance to families searching for lost loved ones. A legacy forged from tragedy, a testament to the enduring strength of sisterly love. She surveyed the faces in the crowd, each one bearing the marks of hope and despair, and she understood that Amelia's passing would not be futile. Her sister's memory would endure. a beacon illuminating the darkness. She spotted Arthur at the rear, his face etched with quiet melancholy. Their eyes met, and she offered a subtle nod, almost imperceptible. True forgiveness might never be possible. Yet there existed a shared understanding, a recognition of the heavy burden they both carried. The sun dipped below the horizon, stretching long shadows across the assembled crowd. Clara inhaled deeply, the briny air filling her lungs. The search for Amelia had concluded, but her mission had just begun. She would dedicate her life to locating the missing, offering solace to the grieving, ensuring that no other family endured the same agony she had. Amelia was gone, but her spirit lived on, a guiding star in the void.